My parents offered me to my sister's cheating ex-like. I was part of a business deal. They never expected what I knew. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 26 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed being the good daughter meant I would always have a place in my family. I spent my life doing everything my parents expected. I earned straight A's, graduated with a business degree, and started working at Bennett Construction Supply when I was 16. What began as answering phones and organizing invoices eventually grew into managing vendor accounts, payroll, contracts, and most of the company's financial records. My father often called me his right hand, while my mother simply described me as dependable. Looking back, they were really saying the same thing. I was the daughter who never said no. My older sister, Vanessa, was my complete opposite. She was impulsive, unpredictable, and always chasing the next adventure. My parents constantly compared us, asking why she couldn't be more like me. I accepted those compliments as love without realizing they were only praising how easy I was to rely on. Everything changed when Vanessa became engaged to Ethan Carter, the son of Richard Carter, whose company supplied nearly 40% of our inventory. Their family gave us preferred pricing and priority deliveries, making the engagement as valuable to our business as it was to theirs. Everyone admired them as the perfect couple, but my parents celebrated the partnership even more than the relationship. Vanessa had discovered Ethan's affair through messages on an old tablet he forgot to disconnect from his account. Hotel reservations, photos, and months of conversations about lying to her left no room for denial. She ended the engagement that same night, then showed up at my apartment after midnight still wearing her ring, twisting it endlessly as tears streaked her face. "I feel stupid," she whispered. "You're not." I defended him to everyone. "That doesn't make his betrayal your fault." After a long silence, she looked at me and said, "Mom and Dad are going to care more about the supplier contract than they care about me." I insisted she was wrong. I wasn't. Vanessa moved back home and started therapy while Ethan's family immediately threatened to reconsider the supplier agreement. Several tense meetings followed as both families searched for a way to save their business relationship. I assumed they were negotiating contracts and pricing. I never imagined they were negotiating me. Without Carter Industrial, my parents risked losing major clients, shrinking profit margins, and paying penalties for delayed projects. The atmosphere at work changed overnight. My father grew increasingly tense, my mother whispered behind closed doors, and conversations stopped whenever I walked into a room. I thought they were searching for a business solution. 3 weeks ago, I learned I was the solution. My mother invited me to Sunday dinner, setting the table with her best dishes and cooking all my favorite foods. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I saw Ethan's black Mercedes parked outside. Inside, everyone was already waiting. Ethan looked completely at ease. Vanessa sat quietly, with her eyes fixed on the table. "What is he doing here?" I asked. "Sit down, Claire," my father replied. "I'll stand until someone answers me." He sighed. Vanessa's broken engagement has created serious problems for the business. Carter Industrial is reconsidering our supplier agreement, and we could lose several major clients. That's not Vanessa's fault. No one said it was. Then stop talking about her life like it's a failed shipment. My mother's forced smile didn't last. "We're trying to solve this calmly." I glanced at Ethan. He wasn't surprised or uncomfortable. The confidence on his face made it obvious this wasn't the first time he'd heard this conversation. Whatever had been discussed over the past few weeks, he'd already agreed to his part. His family had convinced him the arrangement was the only way to preserve both the partnership and the company's future. My father folded his hands together. "Richard and I have spent several weeks working on a solution." A knot tightened in my stomach. "What solution?" My mother answered before he could. "Ethan is willing to give you a chance." I stared at her. "A chance to do what?" My father finally said it. "If you and Ethan become engaged within 6 months, his family will keep the supplier agreement." For a moment, I couldn't believe what I'd heard. "You're asking me to marry my sister's ex-fiancé?" "We're asking you to do what's best for the family," my father replied. "He cheated on her." "People make mistakes." "For over a year?" "Our relationship had problems long before that," Ethan cut in. "You still slept with her roommate," he answered with nothing more than a shrug. Vanessa flinched, and although everyone saw it, no one defended her. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "You're 26, you're single, and Ethan would make an excellent husband. His family is successful, he's educated, and you could start fresh. He betrayed my sister. That was between them." "No," I said, staring at her. "The worst part is that you've convinced yourself this is normal." Ethan smiled faintly. "I always thought you were the smarter sister." Vanessa finally looked up, humiliation written across her face. That was enough. "No." My parents froze. I said no. My father immediately shifted back to business. "You haven't considered the financial consequences." "I don't care." "You should." This company supports our entire family. So your solution is to trade me for cheaper inventory? Don't make this uglier than it is, my mother warned. You invited the man who cheated on Vanessa into this house and offered him another daughter. It doesn't get uglier than that. My father stood. This is how business works. Maybe centuries ago, I replied, grabbing my purse. I'm not a bargaining chip. My mother followed me outside. You're being selfish. Do you know how many people could lose their jobs? Then renegotiate the contract. It isn't that simple. It became simple the moment you decided my life was part of the deal. Everything we've built could disappear because of you. I opened my car door. No, it could disappear because Ethan cheated on Vanessa and his family decided to punish yours. Before getting in, I looked back through the dining room window. My father was already talking to Ethan while Vanessa sat alone at the table, completely forgotten. That image explained everything. My parents never saw daughters. They saw assets. When Vanessa could no longer protect the business, they expected me to replace her. I drove away believing I'd only refused a marriage. I had no idea I just started a war. The pressure began the very next morning. My mother called before 7, then called again 10 minutes later. By noon, I'd received 11 missed calls, 6 messages, and more pressure from my father and Vanessa, all repeating the same excuses. None of them admitted they were wrong or asked how I was doing. By Tuesday, my mother showed up at my apartment carrying pastries, as if kindness could erase what she'd asked me to do. "Dan, we talk?" "We already did." "You walked away." I said no. She sighed. "Your father hasn't slept. He's trying to protect 40 employees. Then he should do it without marrying off one of his daughters." She lowered her voice. "You're making this all about yourself. It became about me the moment you chose Ethan. I isn't asking you to marry him tomorrow. He'd court you first." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Comfortable with what? Marrying the man who cheated on my sister? People survive worse than infidelity. "Then why don't you marry him?" She stared at me, speechless, as I closed the door. That should have ended it. Instead, they escalated. My father began summoning me at work through department managers. "Come to my office. We need to discuss your attitude. Remember who signs your paycheck." I ignored the messages until he appeared beside my desk himself. "Conference room, now." The entire accounting department went silent. As soon as the door closed, he got straight to the point. "You're making this personal." "It is personal. It's a business arrangement." "No, it's your solution to depending on a single supplier." His expression darkened. "This company paid for your education. I've spent 10 years helping build it. Because I gave you that opportunity. I started filing invoices when I was 60. And you were paid. Barely." The words didn't hurt. They confirmed what I'd been slowly realizing for weeks. "You have no idea how quickly your position here can change." Is that a threat? It's reality. No, reality is that I've spent 10 years running vendor accounts, payroll, cash flow, and financial records you trust no one else to handle. He stepped closer. "You're replaceable." For years, my father insisted the company couldn't function without me. The moment I stopped obeying, I suddenly became disposable. "Then replace me." I walked out before he could respond. The pressure only grew. Relatives began calling one after another, insisting Ethan came from a respectable family, that wealthy men weren't perfect, and that I should stop throwing away my future over pride. By the end of the week, my parents' version of the story had spread through the family. According to them, Ethan had developed feelings for me, the marriage would save both families, and I was selfishly refusing out of jealousy toward Vanessa. They had turned coercion into a love story. The following Monday, my mother left a voicemail. "Your father and I have tried to be patient. Come to the house tomorrow at 6. This is not optional, and our attorney will be present." I listened twice. An attorney. For my love life. That was the moment I stopped believing my parents simply didn't understand. They understood perfectly. They just believed they had the right to decide my future. The next evening, I walked into what looked less like a family dinner and more like a legal meeting. My father sat at the head of the table beside my mother, while Martin Hale, the company's longtime attorney, waited with a folder already open. "Claire," Martin said politely, "thank you for coming." I didn't realize refusing an engagement required a lawyer. Ignoring the remark, my father told me to sit. Martin calmly explained that my refusal could seriously damage both the business and the family. Then the threats began. "If you continue refusing," my father said, "you're fired. You'll also be removed from our wills," my mother added. Martin continued without emotion. "Your parents are also considering recovering the money they spent on your college education." I looked from the attorney to my parents. "So you've hired a lawyer to pressure your own daughter into marriage." No one denied it. Martin calmly repeated the consequences. If I refused, I'd lose my job, any future inheritance, and even face legal action over my college tuition. You're helping them threaten their own daughter, I said. I'm advising my clients, he replied evenly. No, you're dressing coercion in legal language. Watch your tone, my father snapped. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. For years, I'd believed there was a line my parents would never cross. Instead, they'd invited a lawyer to explain why crossing it was reasonable. My father slid a sheet of paper across the table. You have 1 week. To do what? Make the right decision. I looked at each of them in turn. You really think you can force me? We think you'll remember everything this family has done for you. Instead, I remembered everything I had done for them. Years of late nights balancing accounts that never quite added up. Personal expenses disguised as business costs. Fake consulting payments. Rental income that never appeared on tax returns. At first they looked like isolated irregularities, but over time the pattern became impossible to ignore. My father trusted me with the company's finances because he believed I'd never betray him. Hay was wrong. He tapped the paper again. 1 week, Claire. I met his eyes. So do you. Without another word, I walked out. That night, I spread years of financial records across my kitchen table. Bank statements, vendor payments, screenshots, receipts, and accounting records I'd legitimately retained through my normal responsibilities long before I ever considered reporting anyone. I organized everything into a timeline before contacting employment attorney Rachel Lawson the next morning. After hearing the threats, Rachel asked only one question. Did you ever sign a loan agreement for your college tuition? No? Then it wasn't a loan. They can't simply rewrite history. When I explained the accounting records, her expression changed. You need a tax attorney. Before we ended the meeting, she gave me one warning. Only use records you were legally entitled to keep through your work. I understand. Within 48 hours, I had spoken with a tax attorney, submitted Form 211 to the IRS whistleblower office with supporting financial records, and filed a report with the State Department of Revenue. My parents believed they had given me 1 week to surrender. In reality, they'd given me 1 week to prepare. 4 days after filing the reports, my father called. Have you made your decision? I already did. His voice turned icy. As of today, you're fired. There was no thank you for 10 years of loyalty, only instructions to collect my belongings. After he hung up, Rachel wasn't surprised. They've helped your case more than yours. How? They fired a long-term employee immediately after she refused their demands. Save every message. They're building your evidence for you. A few days later, my cousin Jake texted me. 5 IRS investigators just walked into the office. Dad's losing his mind. The following afternoon, he sent another message. State revenue is here too. They're asking for payroll records. It had begun. That Sunday morning, someone pounded on my apartment door. My mother pushed past me the moment I opened the door. The woman who had threatened to disown me only days earlier was gone. In her place stood someone exhausted, terrified, and barely holding herself together. What did you do? She demanded. I looked at her calmly. The better question is, what did you do? The IRS is tearing through our company. They know things only someone inside could know. So you've already decided it was me. How could you? I let out a quiet laugh. How could I? You invited the man who cheated on Vanessa into your dining room, tried to marry me off to him to save the company, threatened my job, my inheritance, and my future, and somehow you think I'm the one who crossed the line. That was business. There it is, I said. That's the excuse you've hidden behind since this started. She slammed her purse onto the counter. You think the world runs on feelings. No, I think parents shouldn't treat their daughters like bargaining chips. You weren't being traded. Then explain why saying no cost me my job. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Instead, her voice softened. You have to fix this. I can't. You'll tell them you misunderstood. Tell them the documents were mistakes. I shook my head. The evidence is already with the IRS. They'll compare every document against your own records. Nothing I say changes that. Her composure finally cracked. They'll destroy us. I held her gaze. You were willing to destroy me first. For several seconds, she simply stared at me before delivering the sentence I think she'd rehearsed all morning. If this company goes under, you're no longer my daughter. I stopped being your daughter the day you tried to trade me for a supplier contract. Her face went pale. You're dead to this family. Without another word, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a framed family photo crashed onto the floor. I picked it up after she left and stared at 4 smiling faces that suddenly looked like strangers. 2 days later, my cousin Jake sent a text. You didn't hear this from me. Your parents hired a criminal defense attorney, not a tax attorney, a criminal defense attorney. Rachel had warned me the investigation could become serious, but seeing those words made everything feel real. That evening, my father called. Unlike my mother, he sounded calm, almost gentle. Sweetheart, we've all said things we regret. I haven't. We're still family. Were. I ignored the correction. The investigators are asking difficult questions. You understand our accounting system better than anyone. There it was. The real reason he'd called. You want me to explain the records. I want you to help your family. You want me to explain false accounting to federal investigators. I want you to provide context. You want me to lie. His patience disappeared. You owe us, Claire. We raised you, paid for your education, and gave you a career. I spent 10 years helping build your company. If anyone has repaid a debt, it's me. Silence lingered before my father spoke again. So you're really going to let this happen? No, I said. I'm going to let the truth happen. He hung up without another word. As I lowered my phone, I finally understood why he'd called. He didn't miss his daughter. He needed the one person who knew where every financial secret was buried. The following afternoon, Vanessa messaged me for the first time since that disastrous dinner. Vanessa, then we talk? About what? After several minutes, she finally replied. Vanessa, you're destroying our family. Mom hasn't slept. Dad barely eats. They're terrified. Whatever they did, they don't deserve this. I read it twice before answering. They tried to force me to marry the man who cheated on you. They threatened to fire me, disown me, and even demanded repayment for the college tuition they'd always called a gift. How am I the one destroying this family? She answered almost immediately. Vanessa, they were just trying to solve a problem. I stared at the screen before typing my final reply. It's it. A solution that sacrifices one daughter to protect the man who betrayed the other isn't a solution. It's another betrayal. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then never came back. That silence hurt more than I expected. Somewhere inside me, I'd still hoped my sister would finally see what had happened. Instead, she chose the people who expected me to sacrifice myself next. As the investigation intensified, the calls from my parents gradually stopped. Not because they'd accepted reality, but because they were too busy trying to survive it. I updated my resume, listing 10 years of experience in operations, vendor negotiations, financial management, and inventory planning. For the first time, those achievements belonged to me instead of my family's company. 3 days later, a recruiter from one of our largest competitors invited me to interview for a senior operations position. When I hung up, my apartment felt strangely peaceful. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it depended on my choices instead of my parents' approval. Over the next 6 weeks, I learned the real investigations don't unfold like television dramas. There are no dramatic raids every day, just investigators quietly comparing records, asking careful questions, verifying numbers, and allowing the evidence to speak for itself. One Thursday afternoon, Rachel called. The IRS finished its preliminary review. How bad? Worse than we expected. They're estimating more than $4 million in unreported income. Even I was surprised. I estimated around 3. They uncovered additional cash payments, shell companies, and rental income that wasn't included in the records you provided. Your documents started the investigation, but their own books exposed the rest. A week later, Jake confirmed the damage. Dad hired another lawyer. Everyone's panicking. Apparently the accountant is cooperating. That caught my attention. My father had trusted his accountant almost as much as he trusted me. If the accountant had started talking, it meant the investigation no longer depended on my evidence alone. My parents weren't fighting my report anymore. They were fighting their own records. Rachel explained why that evening. When investigators offered the accountant reduced liability, he cooperated. If he kept his own records, your parents have a much bigger problem than you. That made perfect sense. Martin Ellis wasn't the kind of accountant who trusted memory. He documented everything, and if investigators had his files, my parents' defense had already collapsed. 3 weeks later, another letter arrived from their attorney, accusing me of defamation and interference with business relationships. I laughed before handing it to Rachel. They're threatening to sue me. They're trying to scare you, she said. They know they won't win. Her reply was only a few sentences long. Every allegation I'd reported was supported by evidence, and reporting suspected crimes to the government was protected by law. She ended by demanding they stop contacting me. Their lawyer never answered. My relatives did. Aunt Denise called first. Your parents might lose everything. I know. They're talking about selling the house. Then came the question I'd been expecting. Don't you think this has gone far enough? I reported tax fraud, not my parents. They're still your family. They stopped acting like family when they tried to marry me to the man who cheated on Vanessa. She went quiet. That's not what they told everyone. I'm sure it isn't. One by one, I explained the threats they'd left out. Firing me, cutting me out of the will, and demanding a repayment for college tuition they'd always called a gift. I didn't know any of that, she admitted. They made sure you wouldn't. She apologized before hanging up. It didn't fix anything, but at least one person had finally listened. Others never did. Some relatives blocked me, others defended my parents, while a few quietly reached out after hearing the full story. The family divided itself the way families often do when the truth finally comes out. 2 weeks later, Vanessa called. She sounded exhausted. Mom and Dad might lose Grandma's house. They used it as collateral for the lawyers. Then she asked the question everyone eventually asked. Can't you stop this? I can't. You could tell investigators it was all a misunderstanding. They have years of financial records. My testimony won't change the numbers. She fell silent. I took a breath. If they'd succeeded, if I'd married Ethan after what he did to you, would you honestly have wanted that for me? She never answered. Instead, she whispered, I never wanted any of this. Neither did I. They thought they were protecting the family. They were protecting money. Another long silence followed before she quietly admitted, I miss how things used to be. So do I. But that family only existed because I kept sacrificing myself. She cried. I didn't. For the first time, I understood she wasn't defending our parents anymore. She simply couldn't accept who they'd become. A few days later, a recruiter called to schedule a second interview with one of our biggest competitors. As I wrote down the details, I realized every opportunity in front of me existed because of my own work, not my family's name. For years, I'd mistaken being useful for being loved. The moment I stopped being useful, my parents tried to replace love with fear. 4 months after I left home, Rachel finally called with the news we'd been waiting for. The investigation is over. How bad? Worse than anyone expected. She read directly from the report. The IRS assessed approximately $2.3 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest. The state added another $340,000, nearly $2.7 million. Years of cutting corners had finally produced a bill my parents could no longer outrun. What about criminal charges? I asked. They were considered, Rachel said, but prosecutors decided recovering the money was the priority, so they declined to file criminal charges. So they got lucky. Very. I hung up feeling strangely relieved. Despite everything, I had never wanted to see my parents in prison, but avoiding jail didn't save the business. Within weeks, Jake confirmed they were selling everything: the inventory, trucks, equipment, contracts, and eventually the company itself. They tried restructuring, he told me. No investors want it. It's being dismantled piece by piece. That hurt more than I expected. My grandfather had started Bennett Construction Supply with a single truck and a rented warehouse. My father spent 40 years expanding it, and I'd grown up believing I'd one day help run it. Instead, I watched it disappear because of choices that had nothing to do with me. A month later, Vanessa sent a single message. Vanessa, they sold the house today. I stared at the screen, remembering bike rides in the driveway, Christmas mornings, and summers helping my grandfather in the garden, before replying with the only words that felt honest. I mean, I'm sorry. She answered almost immediately. Vanessa. Mom cried all day. I typed back. I'm sorry for that. I was sorry for their pain. I wasn't guilty for it. My parents had created the disaster years before I ever reported them. A week later, Rachel called again. The IRS approved your whistleblower claim. I sat speechless. You'll receive an award. Based on the recovery, I estimate somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. I laughed quietly. My parents lost everything. And you're finally being compensated for the risks you took. No amount of money could give me back the family I'd wanted, but it could give me something I'd never really had before. Freedom. Harper Building Supply soon offered me a senior operations position with a higher salary, better benefits, performance bonuses, and something I'd never experienced before, a workplace where promotions were earned instead of inherited. During my final interview, the regional director closed my resume and looked at me. I've heard about your family's company. Were the allegations true? Yes. And you reported them? I did. He nodded. Some employers would see that as a risk. I know. I don't, he said with a smile. Someone willing to expose fraud involving her own family is someone I can trust. I accepted the job on the spot. From my first day, everything felt different. No family politics, no whispered expectations, no reminders that I owed someone my future. My coworkers treated me like any other colleague, and after 3 months I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I no longer counted the days until the weekend. That alone told me how much my life had changed. My parents never contacted me again. Rachel suspected their attorney had advised them to stop, while Vanessa occasionally texted updates about them. Mom misses you. Dad isn't doing well. Things aren't the same. I believed every word, but missing me wasn't the same as respecting me. They never apologized, never accepted responsibility, and without that, there was nothing left to rebuild. Then, one Tuesday morning, I ran into Ethan at a neighborhood coffee shop. He looked exactly the same: expensive clothes, effortless confidence, and the same arrogance that once made him believe my parents could simply hand me over. "Heard about your parents," he said with a faint smile. "That's rough." I ignored him. "You know, if you just said yes, none of this would have happened." I turned to face him. "You really believe that?" "If you'd married me, your family would still have their business." I shook my head. "My parents committed tax fraud for years. They tried to force me into a marriage I never wanted. None of that happened because of me." "You reported them." "I stopped protecting them." He crossed his arms. "You ruined your own family." I looked him straight in the eye. "You cheated on Vanessa, sat there while my parents offered me to you like part of a business deal, and never once said no. You weren't a victim, you were part of it." His confidence slipped. "It wasn't that simple." "It was. You could have walked away." "So could you." "I did." He fell silent. I took one final step toward him. My parents were willing to sacrifice one daughter to keep a business deal with the man who betrayed the other. The only difference is that I refused to become the price. For the first time since we'd met, Ethan had nothing left to say. After a long silence, he muttered, "You'll regret this someday." I picked up my coffee. "I already regret wasting so many years believing people like you deserved endless second chances." Before leaving, I looked at him one last time. "Stay away from Vanessa." Then I added quietly, "And stay away from me." I walked out without looking back, realizing I no longer cared what Ethan, or anyone in my family, thought of me. The following week, I drove past my childhood home. A moving truck filled the driveway while strangers carried furniture through the front door. Watching another family move in, I remembered learning to ride my bike there, Christmas mornings with Vanessa, and afternoons helping my father paint the fence. Those memories were real. The memories were real, but I'd spent years giving them a meaning they never truly had. I thought being a good daughter meant working harder, sacrificing more, and asking for less. A month later, Rachel called with the final paperwork. The whistleblower award was enough to clear my debts, buy a modest home closer to work, and finally build a life that belonged to me instead of my parents' business. Vanessa still sent occasional updates. "Mom asks about you. Dad isn't working. The holidays won't be the same." I read every message. I never replied. Not because I hated them, but because nothing changes without accountability, and that conversation never came. People sometimes ask whether I regret reporting my parents. I don't. What I regret is spending 26 years believing I had to earn love by sacrificing myself. I didn't lose my family the day I contacted the IRS. I lost them the day they decided a supplier contract was worth more than their own daughter. Everything that followed was simply the price of that choice. Today, I sleep peacefully. I don't dread phone calls or wonder what part of myself I'll be expected to give away next. Walking away didn't cost me my freedom. It gave it back.